So hi there and welcome to this week's video. Today's video is going to be all about colour grading this photograph I took in Brighton a few weeks ago. So let's just crack straight on and jump into Adobe Lightroom and do some colour grading. So the first thing I want to do is just choose my colour profile. Now I'm going to choose Adobe Standard just because it creates a nice flat base to work on. But depending on your preferences, there's loads of other profiles to choose from. But I want to decide on the colour grading myself rather than letting the software decide for me, so I'm going with Adobe Standard. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to increase my colour temperature a little bit just to draw out some of those warmer colours in the image. This was a sunrise image after all. And you could just adjust your tint just to add some slight magenta into the image. I think that could look quite nice, but I'm not going to pull it too far, just add in a tiny little bit there. Now normally next I would adjust the standard basic settings here, but I'm going to leave them for now because this is about colour grading, so I'll do these at the end. But I am going to add a little bit of vibrance to the image just to give it a bit more punch. You could also add some saturation, but I tend to find this goes too far too quickly over the whole image, so I'm going to leave that set to the default at the minute. So the next thing I'm going to do is look at the tone curve. Now quite often I'll adjust the tone curve just to add a bit more contrast into my image, but today I'm only going to edit the blue colour range, and what I'm going to do is going to pull that down into the yellows just to give it an even more of a sunset or sunrise colour kind of feel. It'll make a global change to the whole of the image, adding a bit more yellow. Of course, if you wanted to, you could add more blue, but I think it will look nicer adding in some extra yellow into the image just to warm it up slightly. Now next, I'm down to the HSL Sliders, and what I'm going to do is use these just to, again, draw out more of those oranges and yellows in the image. So I am going to pull my oranges ever so slightly into the red range, and as you can see, that just adds a bit of extra colour here into the rusty poles, and add a tiny little bit of contrast. And we could just increase the luminance as well there. I think just to add a bit more dodging and burning essentially. And then the yellows here, I'm going to pull them slightly more towards the oranges, and again I could increase the saturation ever so slightly and just tweak that luminance just a tiny touch, just you can see it affecting the back poles there. So I don't think we need too much though. Now we could also adjust the blues in the image. So if you wanted to adjust your sky, you could either add some more blue into the image, or you could go the other way and go more towards aqua. I'm just going to add a tiny little bit more blue into my photograph. Again, I can pull up the saturation and drop the luminance slightly just to darken the sky up a little bit. I'm going to leave magenta and purple alone. Now the next thing we're going to do is colour grade using the colour grading wheels. Now you can have access to all three of the wheels here, but I'm going to go through them one at a time. And I've opened up this tab here that gives me the fine tuning as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, I want to add a bit more blue into my shadows, and as I pull that up you can see that affecting the shadow more and more, but I want to be a bit more subtle with that, so I'm going to drop my saturation back down so it's closer to the middle and just tweak that blue ever so slightly. Okay, so I'm happy with that, and again you could adjust the luminance here, so I'm going to pull my luminance up slightly for the shadows, and you could tweak the blending here. It just adjusts the strength of the colour grading that you've got. The same with balance. They both just adjust the strength of the colour grading, but I'm going to leave them on my defaults. I'm now going to go into my midtones, and I'm going to add some extra oranges into the image for the midtones. Again, we can just tweak that here and then fine tune it down in the section. So I'm going to drop that saturation down slightly and just pull the hue ever so slightly more towards the reds. And then I'm just going to do the same again with the highlights. I want to add more orange and reds into the image, so adjust the saturation. I'm going to increase the saturation slightly because I want to draw out the colour on the horizon, and just tweak the hue until you're happy with the colour. Again, you could adjust the luminance. I'm going to leave that as it is on my highlights. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll all the way down to calibration. You can just use this tool to tweak the blues even more. Again, you could tweak the shadows and the reds and the greens, but I'm just going to adjust the blues. So again, I want to bring my blues into a slightly more natural colour range. So I'm just adding -10 to the hue there on the blue primary. Could just add a touch more saturation into the blues. So the next thing I want to do for colour grading, I'm going to add in a radial filter here, and I'm going to draw that over the horizon line. Now I just need to reset the effects. There we go. So, and I'm going to make sure invert is turned on because I want it only to affect the inside of the image. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my exposure slightly so that I can draw out some more of that horizon, and then I'm going to adjust my colour temperature and pull that up quite a long way to bring more orange onto my horizon of the image. And next what I'm going to do is add a range mask here. So I'm going to just add a luminance mask because I don't want it to affect too much of these poles. So I'm going to show the luminance mask, and I'm going to pull the left slider, and as you can see, the mask is now no longer affecting so much of the shadowy areas of the image. It's only affecting more of the highlighted areas. So let's turn the luminance mask off, and now I think that's looking pretty good. We could probably just boost that even further. There we go. So next I want to draw out more of the detail here in the shadowy areas. So I'm going to add a gradient mask. Let's reset that, and again I'm going to turn the range mask onto luminance, and this time I only want to affect the shadowy areas of the image. So I'm going to clip the highlights, and as you can see the masked areas are shown in red there, so they're the only areas that are going to be affected. So I'm going to drag that down to about 30. Now I don't want to affect the sky at all up here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on brush, and what I can do is use the brush to erase. Let's increase the size. Erase the mask from up here in the top of the sky areas, just so we're not affecting the sky portion of the image. There we go. So we'll turn the show mask off, and what we can do is just pull up the exposure, and we're just getting much more of that detail now in the shadowy areas. Now I'm going to add a bit more contrast back in, and pull out a bit of detail in the shadows, and then add more contrast back in by adjusting the blacks and just dragging them blacks down slightly. And we could also pull out more detail in these poles by adjusting the texture and the clarity. So I'm just going to add a bit of texture and clarity to those, and a bit of dehaze just to add a tiny little bit more contrast. Just be careful to watch your histogram to make sure you're not clipping the darker areas of the image. And I'm starting to be pretty happy with that image, but I want to just bring in a bit more blues into the sky. So what I'm going to do is add another gradient here. Reset that, and I can set my range mask to colour and use the pipette tool just to select the blue of the image. And you can select multiple areas of the image just to make sure you're capturing enough of the range. And then what I'm going to do is drop my temperature, and as you can see we're now getting much more blue into the sky of the image. And again we could just tweak our exposure just to maybe to lighten it up a touch, but we've got much more vibrancy into that sky now, and I'm pretty pleased with that. So So lastly, we just need to start tidying up this image slightly, so remove any sensor spots. So I'm going to go into the spot removal tool here, and you can see here we've got like a sensor spot or maybe a splash of water from the sea. So I'm going to just take that out of the image. Now if you want to see if there are any other sensor spots in the image, I'm just going to zoom back out. You can turn on visualize spots, and that will show you much clearer if there are many more spots in the image. So I'm just going to go through this now and take out the rest of the sensor spots. So there we go, we've now removed all of the sensor spots out of the image. Now we've also got these buoys in the sea that I want to remove. So while we've got the spot removal tool open, let's just click these out of the image. There we go, that's cleaned that up nicely. Now the final change I want to make is to the moon. Now this was a long exposure, so you can see the moon has actually moved. So what I'm going to do is open this up in Photoshop along with another image from the same day that has the moon on it. So I'm going to go Edit in and Edit in Adobe Photoshop. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the moon from this image. I'm going to get a selection tool. I'm just going to copy my moon, trying to only get as much of the moon as I need. So let's copy that. Let's go over to my image, zoom in on the moon here, and let's paste that on. As you can see, the colour isn't quite right. So what I'm going to do is go and add some hue and saturation changes to the moon. So I'm just click on the little icon here so that the hue and saturation only affects the moon image. And I'm going to drop that saturation down. Down slightly, and we can just tweak the color balance, so add a tiny little bit of towards the blue range in the hue. And then what we need to do is just use a mask on the moon, just clean this up slightly. So let's just brush out the areas of the moon we don't need. Just adjust your brush size to really get in nice and close. There we go. And then I'm just going to turn that off for a second. And then I'm going to use the spot removal tool to remove the old moon. Oops. And let's turn that back on. And that's looking pretty good. I think we could just tweak the hue and saturation a tiny bit more actually, just to blend it in that little bit more. So let's drop that saturation just down a touch more. There we go, that's better. That looks more natural. So we're just going to save that. Bring it back into Lightroom. And there we go, and now we could just make any final little tweaks we want to the overall image. So it could just add a tiny little bit more contrast, maybe just pull up the whites slightly, put a tiny bit more detail out of the blacks and drop them highlights. And there we go, we have our final color graded image. And I'll now show you the before and after.